Welcome all. I'm joined by Tavadian, a co-initiator of the FUTURE Armenian initiative and someone who has spent 15 years in the financial industry. We'll be discussing some of the analytics Mr. Tavadian has worked on, especially in the fields of the economy and education. So Mr. Tavadian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So first off, these analytics, which are available to the public on the Futures Studio website at futures-studio.org, they actually cover a wide range of topics and issues. Can you tell us first a bit about these analytics, why they are important in your mind, and what they seek to achieve?
So basically, what we did, we hired several analysts here in Armenia, and I helped them write these analytics. And the idea is really to share with the public the main ideas which are available out there, but they're very complex. They're like thousands and thousands of pages. Nobody's going to read them. So you have to be able to process that and put it on a page or two so that people have an idea what is a constitution, what is a good governance, what is a just society, how is education related to just society. These are things that are not easily available, and you have to make them easy to read and understand, because we want everyone to be able to understand them. So they're written very simple, but at the same time they cannot be too simple as to lose the audience, which is well educated and sophisticated. So you have to strike that balance, and I think we're doing it pretty well. The feedback is positive. It is free, so we're sponsoring it entirely with our own money. It is translated in 3 languages, I think. Maybe soon it'll be 4, which is obviously Armenian, Russian, English, and we're thinking French as well. So that's the main idea, really, because we've come to a conclusion that in the Armenian world, and not just Armenian actually, a lot of words and expressions are used without actually understanding what they mean. What is a liberal? What is liberalism? What is a just society? As soon as you get down to definitions, what is exponential growth? Is GDP per capita important, not important? So that was the main goal, and so we've been, 2 years maybe doing it? But what we realized is people don't like reading. So you have to keep it to page maximum 2. These interviews have to be 10, 15, 20 minutes, because rarely do people sit and watch 50 minutes of an interview. So yeah, that's the world we live in, and we all compete, I think, for people's 1 to 2 hours per day that they have.
And these reports, they cover a wide range of issues. Today I want to focus on the ones that focus on the economy and education. One of them, entitled Excellence in Education, has a number of interesting details, some that I didn't know even. For example, that teachers in Armenia have the lowest average salary compared to a lot of countries in the region, including Russia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and Uzbekistan. When researching and writing up this report, what did you find particularly interesting?
Well, again, these are the analysts that we hired who did a lot of digging and numbers and so on. What I find interesting is Armenia seems to take pride in the fact that its population is educated. I think during the Soviet Union, Armenia was the only republic that had 99% of population that had at least a high school degree. But the thing is, the education is changing very rapidly. It's becoming data-oriented, empirical analysis-oriented, and Armenia is clearly behind. So we're no longer where we used to be. Also, what we find from a lot of research is one of the most important components of a just society is the education, because just society is measured how easily can you move up from the poor strata of the society to the rich or achieved strata of the society, right? Sometimes it takes a generation, sometimes it takes 10. And education is one of the most important determinants of that. So if you have a good education, obviously people will pay you a good salary and you'll be up there pretty quickly. Now, funnily enough, in the republics of the former Soviet Union, because of the anarchy we used to have when the Soviet Union collapsed at the end of 1980s, early 1990s, everything changed, right? So that's not because we had a great education system and it was easy to go from the bottom to the top. It's because the top got decimated. So people came up because there was nobody there. So that's important. What is also important is the education. I mean, it has to be multilingual. I mean, we have to have at least, I mean, Armenians were always a multilingual nation. We just lost that. When the Soviet Union collapsed and we had the chauvinism, demagoguery, people took to the streets and shut down all the schools, Russian schools. A lot of people emigrated. So there were a lot of people who were against something rather than for something. And now has come a time where we can see that knowing Russian is important, knowing English is important, knowing French is important. And we have to recreate. So, okay, we have the American University of Armenia here, which I think is doing a great job. So we have to have this education in different languages if we want to have that competitive society, just society, these inequalities minimized. So it's probably the most important thing for Armenia's development.
Well, what I found interesting about Armenia was that a lot of people do highlight the education sector as an area of concern, and some other countries perhaps it should be an area of concern, but the public don't really have that attitude. Isn't part of these analytics about changing attitudes and how change can only come through a change in public perception?
Yes, that's the goal. I don't know if we can achieve it because, again, so I'm keeping it as short as possible to make sure people read. Certain things people do read, obviously we track, and we have the open rate, the click rate. When we send the email, we can tell which email was opened how many times, clicked on links how many times. We can see what is in demand, what is not in demand. But what I find is basically the English-speaking world, doesn't matter Armenian, not Armenian, is still the one that reads the most. So our highest open rates, highest click rates are still in America, in Canada, in the UK. Not the Spanish-speaking world. The Spanish-speaking world, by the way, is just as much of a disaster as any other worlds. People don't open and don't click as much. Even the Russian-speaking world, everybody in Russia seems to think that they read a lot. That's not true. I don't know what they read, but the open rate and the click rate are not that impressive in Russia. Again, I mean, the question is, can I be objective about something we write ourselves? But I can see from the feedback getting from people from America, from Canada, that it's actually not bad what we write. And I know we're pretty demanding ourselves. And therefore, it's not because what we write is not good. It's because people just don't have the interest or are not curious. Come to think about it, right? There's not a university degree that teaches how to build a country, how to build a state. Economically, financially, legally. It's not something that you're taught. So how does a country prosper? I don't even think there is a book. I mean, there is one book that the guys wrote about the institutions. It's important to have institutions. Okay, fine. But how do you build those institutions? So we're trying to fill that gap through, 1 page, 2 page articles to have a discussion within the Armenian world. How do you build a state? It's about citizenship rights, passports, constitution. These are all important questions. Not being discussed actively enough, I believe.
Yeah, you think. And I mean, in terms of the economy, you have a great deal of experience in the financial sector. You have worked at Commerzbank, at Citibank. In terms of the economy, Armenia is in a critical stage of its history. But some people believe that in terms of the economic sphere, there is some good news, there are some positive signs. One of the analytics published is called exponential growth. How would you describe this particular one? Because we have been seeing certain positive levels of economic growth in Armenia, but at the same time, there is issues in terms of social welfare, in terms of security. So can you break that down for us?
Yeah, sure. Again, it's a tough one. If you look at simple statistics, from 2000, I believe, until about 2008 financial crisis, Armenia was growing at 20% per year. Then in the 2000 crisis hit, it collapsed, I think, by about 25 or 30% that year. And then since then, it never really recovered that pace. Now, there are two reasons for that. First is, of course, it is easier to grow faster when you're very poor. So we went from $1,000 GDP per capita to 3,000 GDP per capita. But then going from 5 to 8 is a lot more difficult than going from 1 to 3, right? So we are about 4.5, 5 right now, and our growth rates are not impressive. I mean, they're good, but they're not what they should be if we really want to sort of.
What would you say would be a good target for economic growth?
So I believe in Armenia, we could easily have double digits GDP per capita growth, GDP per capita. That is assuming that your capita grows. Even if population grows, I'm saying that GDP per capita can still have double digits growth for only one reason. And the main reason is, as we know, it's one of the, I think, 4 countries in the world that has more than 150% of its population outside of Armenia, living in rich, wealthy countries, having a great level of education, having equity capital to invest if required. So that is our potential. And we're not working hard enough at utilizing that potential. It is, people talk about it, we know it's there, but it's like number 15 on the list. It should be number 1, because that's where the equity capital is going to come from. This is what. So what is productivity growth, right? It's either human capital or it's physical capital. Either this or this, you have to pay for that. Now, human capital we already have, it's available, it's there. It's in the US, it's in Canada, it's in France, in the UK, and so on. Let's try to use it, right, to have the productivity growth that we need to have here. And the physical capital requires equity, not debt, because a lot of people in Armenia take debt and go into a business. That doesn't work, because as we know, debt doesn't forgive mistakes. If debt doesn't forgive mistakes, I don't know any businesses without mistakes. So how do you do business based on debt? You're guaranteed to go bankrupt, right? So you have to do business based with equity. And the easiest way to get equity is to get it from the Armenian diaspora living. And again, the word diaspora, again, what do we mean? We wrote a paper on that. What is diaspora? Because all these words, you have to be very specific and very precise what you mean. What is a diaspora? How about the other countries? Do they have a diaspora? So all these things I'm saying, it's on our website. So we spent time and we went, again, 2 pages, but each terminology, what is a diaspora? What is productivity growth? What is exponential growth? What is just society? We went and we spent time and we tried to structure our thoughts.
And the analytics also cover the issue of inflation, a rising inflation rate in Armenia, which has been at the center of a lot of people's attention. Just recently, the head of the central bank, Martin Galstian, was saying that inflation rates are rising across the world, and it's not a purely Armenia phenomenon. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, are we not concerned enough about the rising inflation rate, or should we be more concerned?
Okay, so the governor is correct of the central bank. It is a global phenomenon. It's a widely discussed topic everywhere in the West. The reasons are very simple. With COVID, people have started to spend more time at home, and they've started to buy more goods, and they bought less services. If you look in the services sector, there's no inflation; it's collapsed. Because there have been shutdowns, restaurants have shut down here. But the goods, because people have started to buy more goods, Amazon, all this online shopping, the producers haven't been able to produce because the increase was unexpected and sharp. On top of that, people are working less. I mean, I don't care what people say, from home, you will not work as productively as working from your office in most areas, not in all. So is that temporary? That's a key question. I believe it is temporary. A lot of central banks in developed countries believe it's temporary. A lot of very smart people at the Federal Reserve, at the Bank of Canada, believe it's temporary. The key question is expectations. Have people's expectations, because once expectations are out of control, what people do, they start raising prices, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So far, there is no, we're not talking about countries like Turkey, right, where it's 45% inflation rate. We're talking about the developed world. So I don't think inflation is a problem in Armenia. And I think in Armenia it's the opposite. The central bank has always been too conservative, has always kept interest rates too high, and has always made it very difficult for the business sector to develop faster. They've been too conservative. And obviously the banks here benefit from that, from higher interest rates. So I don't know whether they're in cahoots or not. I hope not. But the central bank, I think people should put more pressure on the central bank to become more business friendly and not have interest rates at such high level. A very simple statistic, for example, if you take pre-COVID, central bank rates or interest rates in Armenia, minus inflation in Armenia, so you're doing interest rates minus inflation gives you the real interest rate, inflation adjusted. I think it was in the top 10 in the world. The real interest rate in Armenia pre-COVID, it was way too high. And the question is, why is it so high? Inflation was what, between 2 and 3% in Armenia? The question is, for an emerging market, for an emerging country with a GDP per capita between $4,000 or $5,000, do you really want to have an inflation rate at 2%? Is it not too low? Maybe it should be 3 or 4. And that is why all the people here in Yerevan or in Armenia, when they work hard and the only thing they can do is pay off the interest on their loans, because the interest rates are so high. So this is one of those things people always underestimate. It's hidden, it's not publicly discussed, but it's a very powerful thing, the interest rates. They change so much.
Right. And this is quite a complex topic. I mean, Mr. Tavadian, yes. Some would say that they may pose the question, why should I educate myself? Why should I read these analytics when there's the issue of political will? And ultimately, isn't that more important? What would you say to people who think that their own enlightenment about these issues is secondary to the creation of a political will to reform Armenia?
I think after the Pashinyan Revolution, I call it the Velvet Revolution, whatever, Armenia has stepped on a path which has made it really unique in the emerging market world, on the right path, where people get to choose and decide their destiny, right? That we have fair elections, we've had it, they were fair, the last elections we had. But how on earth are you going to decide who you're going to vote for, which program, if you're clueless about the role the Constitution plays in the country's life, the role the monetary policy plays, fiscal policy, what is a governmental debt to GDP that we should have 60%, 80%, 100%, 200% like Japan? Why or why not? What is a diaspora? What is education? So you have to be a citizen. And the only way to be a responsible citizen is to educate yourself on these basic principles. They're in the legal sphere, in the economic sphere, in the historical sphere. And unfortunately, there's too many Armenians who base their opinions on subjective, prejudiced talks instead of being data-oriented. It's one of the 15 goals in the Future Armenian is we have to be data-driven, empirical analysis-oriented. Objective thinking, why are mathematicians more successful than, I don't know, people who don't understand anything in math? Is because they're objective. You know, life forces them to be, but the only way to be objective is to look at the facts and the data. We'll get there, I'm sure, because what I've seen in Armenia over the last year and a half are very powerful fundamental changes that nobody wanted to make because they were too politically suicidal. I don't know, they were too difficult to make, too much stench coming out of them. I'm talking about the Artsakh question, I'm talking about the relationship with Turkey. So they're being addressed now. They're very fundamental questions and they're important. You can see the change from the second you arrive at the airport. From passport control, from customs, the way the taxi drivers don't park where they're not allowed to park. So the law-abiding mentality is present. And I hope it continues, but this path is very fragile. It's very easy to get off it and get back on this authoritarian, dictatorial, corrupt path we were on.
Now, wouldn't you say it's also quite generational? I mean, you mentioned the American University of Armenia. You meet students there who have very modern data-based approaches.
Yeah. And we hired from there as well. A couple of our analysts were from there. One from the Russian Armenian University, which was also fine. But again, these universities need funding, and we have to take it seriously. From our schools all the way to universities, it is the most important thing. More important than anything else, I believe.
Okay. Well, Mr. Tavadian, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And you can read the analytics yourself at futures-studio.org. Thank you for joining us on CivilNet.